Do you want to make sure that everybody could hear me? I hope everybody could hear me. Okay.
I hear you.
Okay, Baruch Hashem. Okay, so let's get started. I think the recording is on. For some reason, the app didn't load properly. That's why it was taking a little bit long. So let's see what the Gemara says. So we learned yesterday at the end of the day, the Gemara was analyzing this svara of lo yehi tafel chomer min ikar, and that was how the Gemara knew, and Bilozer knew, that if you shecht a shlomim in the heichal, it would be a kosher shchita, because since you can shecht in the azara, lay tavel chomer min ikar. The Gemara challenged that from the halacha that the Brasha teaches us that if there's danger in the azara, there are a lot of the kohanim are a lot of kachim in the heichal itself. It's a building, so there's shelter from arrows and spears. The Gemara had to bring a special pasuk for it of the kodesh hakadeshim techlenu. The Gemara wanted to ask if you have the svara of shalaye tafel chomer min ikar, why the extra pasuk of kodesh kachim? So the Gemara made a simple distinction that avoda. When we're talking about can you do avoda, can you do shchita in the heichal? There, the adam oived b'makom rabbi. It's normal for someone, for a servant, to do service in his adon's inner chamber. So therefore, it makes sense to say I'm reading shlei tavol chomer min ikar. But achila, shein adam oichel b'makom rabbi, you never find that the servant should eat in the quarters of his rebbe. Therefore, you need a pasuk of the kodesh hakadeshim tachlenu. Otherwise, you wouldn't say the svara of leah tafel chomer min ikar. Itmar, the Gemara discusses another shaila. Balala chutz l'chayim azara. When a mincha is prepared, the oil and the flour have to be mixed together. Then the kemitza is done, and then the haktara is done. Now, at what point does it have to be in the azara? When you mix the oil and the flour together, does that have to be already in the azara, or can that be out of the azara? So Rabbi Yochanan Amar Psula and Rish Lakish Amar Kshera. And Rish Lakish says it is kosher. And what is the shaila? Zok Gemara as follows: Rish Lakish Amar Kshera, Dichsiv Vayitzik Aleh Shemen, V'Nasan Aleh Levina, and then only afterwards does the pasuk say V'Hadar V'Hevia El B'nei Aaron HaKohanim the comments. So that teaches us that Mikmitza Ve'elach mitzvahs kahuna. Where, at what point does the kohen have to be involved in the processing of the mincha? From Kmitza. Limed al Yitzika Uvelila Sekshen Bizarre. We know that pouring the oil into the carbon mincha, mixing it together, that are actions, those are actions that can be done by a zar. Umita kahuna loy, if it does not require the avodah of a kohen doing that part, pinim nami loy, so it doesn't need to be done in the azar either. So the Gemara is equating the requirement of a kohen to do the avodah with the requirement of the avodah to be done in the azar. Rabbi Yochanan Psula, kiven dasiyasa bechlihu dvibalt. Where do you mix it? In the klisharis, nehida kahuna leboi. You might not require the services of a kohen for this part, but penim miyabai. You still need this avodah to be done in the azar. Tanya Kavaset Rabbi Yochanan, we have a brayta that supports Rabbi Yochanan. The brayta says a bol azar kshera, but chutz l'chayim azar psula. So we see just because it doesn't need to be done by a kohen, that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be done bifnim. Zok Gemara weiter. Itmar mincha shechasra koydem kemitza. A mincha that part of it went missing before the kemitza. So the question is, we know you for sure cannot take a kemitza from a mincha that's chaser. That's not a discussion. The discussion is if you could just add random flour and oil to the mix, or once the mincha was crystallized in the klisharis as this is sorry is the mincha, you can't just bring some other supplement. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Yovi mitoich beisa v'yim alena. Just bring more content from your house and refill the mincha before the kmitza. And Rish Lakish Amar, lo yovi mitoich beisa v'yim alena. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, maybe mitoich beisa v'yim alena, because kmitza koveli. The kmitza is what's convey the carbon, and until the kmitza, you can add more. You can modify what's in there. Because it's kedushas klikava. The moment you have the yisarin in the keli, that yisarin altogether becomes crystallized as the mincha. If someone goes missing, you can't just refill it with other product. Rashi explains this quite beautifully. Zok Rashi, Dibur Hamaskol, Kemitza Kavala. Zok Rashi, the Halkama, the loy komets, until the Kemitza occurs, loy mikri mincha. This is not crystallized yet as the carbon mincha. And therefore, v'loy karmina bei mina mincha prat l'shechasra. Come on. How do we know that a mincha that's missing some of its content, you can't make mitzvah on because it says mina mincha, from the mincha, but not every mincha. Because if it's missing, it's not kosher. At what point does it become a mincha, an item? That's the kmitza. Now Rashi says another interesting general rule to know for the entire Masechta. Kol lashon kviyos, the Amar b'Menachos. Anytime you're going to find a lashon of kviyos, l'gabe mincha, like it says over here, Kabbalah, what's kviyah the mincha? That always means zakok zelose. All of the parts are now connected and dependent upon one another. And you can no longer replace any component with a replacement. They were designated together, or they're like crystallized. This is the mincha. You can't just take some out and put some more in. Or do you say kedushas kli kavala b'shem the karina ba min mincha prat l'shechasra? So that is the discussion. Where does it become kavua as a mincha? Gewaltig. Zog the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan maybe to Rabbi Yochanan had a kasha to Rish Lakish. Chaser haloik. Now, where is a loig required? Rashi tells us there's a loig shemen required in the processing of a mitzvah. Some of that went missing. Ad shaloy yotak al kapay asmolas. In middle of the process, before he poured the oil on his left palm, Yimalena, you could refill it. You don't say that once someone missing, once it was already placed in the klesharis, if it gets missing, you can't add to it. You don't say that. So therefore, Freik the Gemara Gavaltik Kasha. Chasar loig im ad shalo yotzak yimalenu. So you see the fact that it was put into the keli does not koiveya it as the loig. It's only when you start to do avodah. So the more you write, Tiyufta, that's a raya to Rabbi Yochanan. Zok the more writer. Shiraim shechasru ben kmitza laktar. These are all sugis that we discussed yesterday as well. Shiraim shechasru ben kmitza laktar. You made the kmitza of the mincha, everything was running perfectly. Then, normally the shiraim would be taken and be given. Normally the next step would be that the kmitza would be burnt on the mizbeach, after which the shiraim would be given to the kohanim. But what happened was, before you had a chance to put the kmitza on the mizbeach, some of the shiraim went missing. So Rabbi Yochanan Omer makdir kaimetz aleim. You still bring the kmitza. Rish Lakish Omer ein makdir kaimetz aleim. You can no longer be makdir the kmitza because the shiraim went missing. Alibud Rabbi Eliezer. According to Rabbi Eliezer, kula almaloi pligi. Everybody agrees. Who is Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi Eliezer is the Manda Omar who holds that you don't say im ein basar ein dam. The pasuk says vasisa oileisecha habasar v'adam. And the question is there a connection between the basar and the dam? Rabbi Eliezer learns dam abal b'shein basar, meaning what happens if you shech the carbon and before you had a chance to make this rika, all of the basar went missing, or became tame, or became yoytze. It became disqualified. Do you make zrikas adam if there's no basar for the dam to be matir? So Rabbi Eliezer says no problem. There's dam alpha b'shem basar. The dam and the basar are independent. So according to that shita, of course everybody would agree that you could make the Kemitah even though some of the Shiraim went missing. Think about it. Rabbi Eliezer holds even if there's no Shiraim at all, you can make this Rika. By our Mincha, there's still a Shiraim remaining, some of it went missing. So surely you're allowed to be maktir the Kemitah. So that's not the discussion. Kula amala pligi. Keep pligi. The whole discussion between Rebbe and Shlakish is I'll leave it to Rabbi Yeshua, who will hold v'asisa elesecha basar b'dam and ein basar ein dam. If there was no shirayim left, you don't even spritz the blood at all. So the question here is, since some of the shirayim went missing, do you maktir the claimants? It's not we learned. Nitnu shiareha. What if the shirayim of the Mincha became Tameh, or Nisrifu Shiyara, got burnt, or Odu Shiyara, or it got lost. Kemidas Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer, where you don't need Shirayim, Kshera, of course, it will be kosher. Kemidas Rabbi Yeshua, it would be Psula. So Zog to Gemara, Man the Apostle, Rabbi Shlokish holds Ein Makter Kaimates, he holds like Rabbi Yeshua. It's very, very simple. Rabbi Yeshua, Uman the Machshir, but what about Rabbi Yochanan? How could he explain Rabbi Yeshua? Zog Rabbi Yochanan very easily. Akanlei Omer Rabbi Yeshua Hasam Ela de Lo Yishtayir. Where did Rabbi Yeshua say you can't be matir the claimants? That's if there's nothing left of the davar that we need to be matir. There's no meat left, or there's no shiraim of the mincha left. That's when Rabbi Yeshua says is halacha. Aval hechad yishtayir, but here we didn't lose all the shiraim. Some of it went missing. Afilu Rabbi Yeshua moidele. Rabbi Yeshua would be moide that this is kosher. So therefore Rabbi Yochanan says even Rabbi Yeshua is moide to me. The Tanya Rabbi Shua Aimer, Kol Azvachim Shabbatayr Shenishtar Mehem Kzayis Basar or Kzayis Chelev. Any Zvachim, even though I hold if there's no Basar, there's no Dam, but if some was left over, a minimum of a Kzayis, which would be eaten by the Kohanim or the Bailim, or Kzayis Chelev, or at least the minimum amount to be makter on the Mizbeach, that's enough to Zayre Kadam. But what if I didn't have a full Achilas Mizbeach? I didn't have a full kazayis of chaylev, or I didn't have a full achilas odam. I didn't have a kazayis of basar. So kechazi zayis basar, kechazi zayis chaylev, there ain't a zorek es adam. Why? Because I have a half achila of mizbeach, a half achila of odam, and achilas odam and achilas mizbeach are not mitzdaref. However, if it's a carbon oila, afilu kechazi zayis basar. Why? Because that's all achilas hamizbeach. Okay. Uve mincha. What about a mincha? Afal pisha kula kayemes lo yisrek. If you have a carbon mincha and some of it were missing, you don't spritz the blood. So right away, what is this talking about? What blood is there to spritz by a carbon mincha? So Frank the Gemara, mincha. I'm just going to turn the omelet over to my base. One moment, please. Mincha Mayavidza. What dam is there by a carbon mincha? Amar Papa Minchas Nesachim. You know what we're talking about? We're talking about the mincha that normally accompanies a carbon. So what happens if you shech the carbon and now you have the dam to spritz and all of the basar and all of the chelev go missing? So we just learned main basar and dam according to Rabbi Yeshua, you wouldn't be able to make zrikas and dam. But what if the minchas nesachim is still there? So by the zrika, it'll be matter the minchas nesachim. Would that be enough to do the zrika? So the Gemara Amar Papa minchas nesachim. So I would have thought, since this carbon mincha is brought to accompany the carbon, it's like part of the shiraim of the carbon, and therefore kigufe dezevach dami, and that would be enough to be able to make zrikas adam. Kamash malon. What about Rish Lakish? What's Rish Lakish going to do over here? This seems to indicate quite clearly that even if some was missing, it's not a problem. Zok to Gemara, right? We have a brisa where Rabbi Shua said beferish. If there's even a kazayis of chelav or kazayis of basa remaining, it will be a kosher carbon. So why would Rish Lakish learn in Rabbi Shua that if I have only a little bit missing in the mincha, it's possible. It's mashma, even if you have a kazayis left of the mincha, it should also be kosher. So Gemara shiny hachadam akra. By mincha, the Torah has a special requirement. It says v'herim hakayin mina mincha is askarasa, the hiktar mizbecha. So when are you makdir hamizbecha? If you have the harama min hamincha, meaning hamincha ad isa lakula mincha lo yakdir. So the herimakayim min hamincha, if the full mincha is still there, then it's askarasa the hiktar mizbecha. But if the full mincha is not there, you cannot make that Torah. So there's a special pasuk according to Rish Lakish that tells us that unless the full shirayim remain, you will not make that Torah of the kaimetz. The idach. What about Rabbi Yochanan? How is he going to understand this pasuk? Mina mincha shoyse kvar. It means before the kmitza, there had to be a full mincha here. Nothing could have been missing. But after the kmitza is done, even if some of the mincha is missing, Rabbi Shua would still remind that it would be kosher and you could be maktir the kaimetz on the mizbeach. Esvei Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan is going to bring a right to Rish Lakish that even though some of the mincha was missing, it's still going to be kosher to put the kmitza on the mizbeach, because it says the following. This is a brisa we're very familiar with. We looked at yesterday, referring to the lechem upon ad shaloi parka nifras lachma. What if before the bazich levina, which is the equivalent of the kmitza, were taken off the shulchan? If the lechem apanim broke and is missing, halechem pasol, the whole mincha or the whole siddur of lechem apanim is pasol. The kohanim will not get them. Ve'ein maktir olaves abazich, and you're not going to be maktir the kaimetz. However, imisha parka nifras lachma, but if only after the kmitza was done, the bezichin were removed, which is connected to kmitza, then the halacha is halechem pasol. The lechem is still pasol. The kohanim don't get it, but umakter alav esabazich. V'yamar Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Elazar said, "Loi parka mamish." You don't need that the bezichin were already removed. Elakivan shegia zman elefareg. Once the time has already arrived, which is the 7th hour of Shabbos, 7th hour of the day, now it's time to remove the bezichin. The af al pi shaloi pirka, even though the bezichin weren't physically removed, we still look at it like it was already removed. So we have a problem over here, because what does this brisa clearly tell us? This brisa clearly tells us that if some of the shirayim was missing, even after the kmitza, you will still be maktir the kmitza. According to Rish Lakish, you shouldn't be able to be maktir the kmitza here, because some of it meant missing even after the kmitza. Zok the Gemara, that's not shver. Hamani Reb Eliezer he. Maybe this brisa, where the brisa talks about this halach of the lechem upon him, maybe that's going according to Reb Eliezer, who holds anyway, even if there's no shirayim at all, you could still be maktir the kaimetz. Amar lei. So Rabbi Yochanan told Rish Lakish, what type of teretz is that? Ana aminalach mishnah shleima. I'm quoting you a mishnah that's a stam mishnah that doesn't identify itself as being according to one Tana or another Tana. It's a stam mishnah that means we pass like that across the board. Amrat liat, and you're going to tell me Reb Eliezer is going according to Reb Eliezer? It can't be going according to Reb Eliezer, because Reb Eliezer holds you don't need any shrine at all. So you, Reb Eliezer, my ear, your nifras, Vos Epis the Brisa says that if the lechem upon them broke and something went missing, you could still be marked to the levona. According to Reb Eliezer, I feel sorry for Avod Nami Machsher. According to Reb Eliezer, if this Brisa is really Reb Eliezer, the Brisa should have said a case where all of the lechem upon them went missing, not just a little piece went missing. Because according to Reb Eliezer, even if the entire lechem upon them went missing, the Bezich and Lavoina would still be able to be brought on the Mizbeach. Because he holds by a carbon, even if all the meat and all the chaylev went missing, you would make this rika. So clearly, this brisa is not Rabbi Eliezer. It's going according to Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Yeshua is only matir because some of it went missing, but not all of it went missing. Zog to Gemara, Ishtik. Rish Lakish did not have an answer for Rabbi Yochanan. So it's mashma that he accepted Rabbi Yochanan's kasha, and there's a raya here that even according to Rabbi Yeshua, if it's nifras the lechem upon him, meaning some of the shiraim went missing after the kmitza, you would still be marked to the kmitza. Frank the Gemara of Amai Shosak. Rish Lakish had such a good comeback. Why did he take this from Rabbi Yochanan? You know what Rish Lakish could have said? This isn't the standard mincha. The lechem upon him is a mincha of a tzibur. So, Amai Shosak. Leimeloi tzibur shiny. What Rish Lakish could have said that Rish Lakish should have said that you can't ask me a kasha from the lechem upon him. You know why? Because the lechem upon him is a carbon tzibur, and you find kulois by a carbon tzibur, by a regular mincha from a yochid. Avad, if a little bit went missing, everybody agrees that you would not be marked at a kovetz. Why are you marked at a kovetz but the lechem upon him? Because it's a carbon tzibur, and you find the Torah is lenient by a carbon tzibur. Hoyel ve'ishtri tumah lagabayu ishtri nami chaseris. We know there's a kula by a carbon of a tzibur, tumah hutra b'tzibur. So the same way you find there's kulois, and we allow hakrova to occur by a carbon tzibur, when it's tomei, maybe we also allow hakrova of the kovetz of a mincha of the tzibur, even though some of the shiraim went missing. And that would have been a good comeback for Rish Lakish. Amar Rav Barava, Zot Rav Barava. If Rish Lakish didn't offer this comeback, it must be that Rish Lakish knew that this was not a good answer, and he knew that a carbon tzibur is not a justification to allow chaseros to be brought on the mizbeach. Why isn't it like Tomei? Dr. Rabbi Zayis Amerish, you know what you see from Rish Lakish's silence? That achisarin kabal mumdami. Missing part of the shiraim is not just like any problem. It's like a bal mum. The ein bal mum b'tzibur. Never do you find it because of a carbon tzibur, because it's lenient, just because tumot b'tzibur, that you could also be matar bal mum. No one considered it that you would ever be able to be makriv a bal mum on the mizbeach. Hu adin chaser shiraim is perceived just like a bal mum, and therefore Rish Lakish did not have a comeback. And it seems like Rabbi Yochanan had a slam dunk raya from this brisa, and even though in a mincha some of the shiraim went missing, you will still be marked to the Torah. Beautiful. Zok Gemara. Yosy Rav Papa v'Amar Lo Shmaitza. Rav Papa said over this shaila. Which shaila? Rashi clarifies. Lo Shmaitza the ishtik v'leishadi le'tzibur shaydi. Rav Papa said over the story where Rish Lakish was challenged by Rabbi Yochanan, and Rish Lakish chose not to make a distinction by saying that we would only be matir a chasera with the shiraim or nechsar by a carbon tzibur. Amalei Rabbi Yosef bar Shammai Rav Papa. So Rabbi Yosef told Rav Papa, "Mi lo yaskinan the Rabbi Yochanan of Rish Lakish ben minchas ha'omer the tziburi upligi." When Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish had their machlokes originally by a mincha that after the kmitza, some of it went missing, where Rabbi Yochanan said you will be matir the kmitza, Rish Lakish says you will not be matir the kmitza. They said they're arguing by a mincha. They didn't specify dafka minchas yachid. They said any carbon mincha. So included in any carbon mincha is the carbon minchas ha'omer, the tzibur, which is a carbon tzibur. Ufaligi, and we see that they were still arguing. So clearly the machloikas is even by a carbon tzibur where Rish Lakish would hold that it would be possible. So b'meila he couldn't have answered that anyway. Zot Rashi, mi lo yaskinan, pluta de la'il, the original machloikas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. The chinami kamer Rish Lakish ein maktir in kovetz aleim. When Rish Lakish expressed his opinion that you're not maktir kovetz if some of the shiraim is missing, it's even b'michas tzibur nami amar kegoyin bazichim the lechem upon him. He must have been speaking even about a korban tzibur. So therefore, you wouldn't be able to make that distinction. Zog to Gemara, Amar of Malchiyoi, Tani Chado. It says in one brisa, it says in the pasuk, Vevia el b'nei aharon hakayanim, v'kamatz misham. He takes the kmitza from the mincha, v'loi kumtzoi, misolta u'mishamna al kolovaynasa. So zok to Gemara. One brisa says misolta, and what do we learn from misolta? Shemchas rekol shehu psula. If the mincha is missing even a mashu, it's going to be possible. Mishamna, shemchas rekol shehu possible. If it's missing even a drop, it's going to be possible. Okay? But we have another brayso that says, V'aneseres min hamincha. It says the pasuk V'aneseres min hamincha. Prat lemincha shechasra hi v'shechasra kanta v'shalahikter milavaynasa klum. So Zok Rashi, when they say from the mincha, prat l'shechasra hi, the mincha shleima mashma. Like we said earlier, ha mincha is mashma, that it has to be a complete mincha. Prat l'mincha shechasra hi, if the mincha is missing, or v'shechasra kanta, Rashi says, the shiyarei mincha ha'asuya kol chasa mashma. When can you eat the shirayim? If the carbon was processed appropriately, kilchasa. Therefore, the kaimetz achaser, if it's missing some of the kaimetz, nafkalan b'kaimetz rabo, the posel b'dichsiv maloi kumtai trezimni. It says maloi kumtai twice to tell you that if any part of the kamitza went missing, the carbon is possible. That's another. So either it's mincha shechasra, or shechasra kanta, and the third problem would be vishalahikta milavenasa klum. Rashi says, if no levine at all, if some levine was hooked up on the midbech, that's good enough. But if none at all, it would be possible. Nafka b'akaymet rabba. Again, we learn it on Daf Chav Zayin. That teres levina the kaimetz ma'akves uzu. If there's no levina, the whole haktar the kaimetz will not be kosher. Milavenasa klum zok Rashi. Avlam hikter ksas. If you're even makar of just a little bit of levina, that will be enough. Nachol na shirayim, you can eat the shirayim. Kedam lekaman by pirka dimchaser b'shas haktar kshir. So zok the Gemara. Trey Kroy Bichaseris Lomli. Why did we need two psukim to tell us Misalta Shem Chasras Psula and Mishamna Shem Chasra Kashu Pasal? And when it says from the Mincha, Prat Misha Chasra. Why do we need two psukim to tell us that a Chasra is possible? Trey Kroy Bichaseris Lomli. Lav, wouldn't you argue that Chad La Mincha Shechasra Koidim Kmitza? One pasuk is telling you that if the mincha went missing before the kmitza, if part of the mincha went missing before the kmitza, the whole thing is possible. V'chad l'shirayim shechasru ben kmitza l'aktarah. And the other pasuk is to tell you that even if after the kmitza some of the shirayim went missing, it will also passel the carbon, which is a right to Reish Lakish's perspective. Utiyukta de Rabbi Yochanan b'tevayu. And now Rabbi Yochanan is agaslagen by both halachas. Zok Rashi, Trey Kroy. Misailas umina mincha. That's the two psukim. Aval mishamna, the pasuk mishamna that we were medayik. Shalachasha klum loy chashav. That's not part of the Gemara's calculation here. The hailu gufei yasa. That mishamna we need for the pasuk shot of the pasuk. Lekaidim kmitza, to tell us that if the mincha went missing, some of it went missing before the kmitza, it's possible. Aval besailas lamli trei. Why do we have two psukim that discusses a psul of chasar when it comes to the silence? Lav l'kodim kmitza, the l'yavim mitoich beis haviyamalena. One must be telling you that you're not allowed to bring, if the mincha went missing before the kmitza, you can't bring more content and fill it up. Once it was placed into klisharis, like Rish Lakish said, it seals and crystallizes. This is the mincha. And the second pasuk will be l'shirayim shechasru, meaning after the kmitza, if some of the shirayim went missing, Again, like Rish Lakish, they ain't maktir and kaimitz alei. So that would be a tiyufta on Rabbi Yochanan's both shitas, on both of the things that he said. So Zok Gemara tiyufta to Rabbi Yochanan b'tevayu. Zok Gemara no loy chad lemincha shechasra kodim kmitza. One is referring to a mincha that became chasra kodim kmitza. If you could bring supplemental content, it's going to be kosher. That's what the first pasuk is talking about. If it's kosher, you can't take the kmitza, but you surely could supplement it. And the other one is referring to shiraim that went missing, part of it went missing after the kmitza. The afagab the makter koimetz aleim oison shiraim asurim lachila. Even Rabbi Yochanan agrees. He says about your makter kmitza, but that doesn't mean you're allowed to eat the shiraim. So he says that the dik from the pasuk that it's possible if shiraim, some of it went missing. That means lagabi the achilas hashirayim. The boiler, we had a shaila. The divrei ayim shirayim shechashu ben kmitza laktara makter kaimitz alein. Oishon shirayim, those shirayim mahim be'achila. You're allowed to eat them. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, who holds you could be makter the kaimitz, would you be able to eat the shirayim? Amar zuri amar kra v'hanoi seres v'loy hanoi seres min hanoi seres. All of the shirayim of the mincha, if it's there, are you allowed to eat? But if it's only some leftover from the leftover, meaning you don't have all the leftover here, that would be osur to be eaten. Rabbi Yanai Amar meha mincha shoysek kfar. Once it was complete before the kmitza, everything is kosher, and even though we don't have all the shiraim remaining, it could still be eaten by the kohen. Gavalti. The Gemara goes weiter, kamatz bismoil. If the kmitza was done with the left hand, the Mishnah says that's going to be possible. Zok the Gemara, mina'anamili. How do we know? Amar Abzera the Amar Kra, vayakrev es hamincha, vayimalei kapoi mimena. He should be makrev the mincha and fill up his hand with it. Let's see the pasuk inside. It's in vayikra vayakrev es hamincha vayimalei kapoi mimena. And then vayakter al mizbeach milvad oilas habayir. So what does this mean? Kaf said his kaf that he fills with the mincha. Any of them out. What is it referring to? Kishahu Aimer. When the pasuk says v'lokach hakoyin miloy kashemen v'yotzek al kaf hakoyin asmolis. When the Torah gives us instruction by the processing of the mitzayra that the loy shemen has to be poured on the kohen's left palm, I would say. Kan smolas. The Torah by the Mitzvah had to speak out the left side. Mashma that the default of what a kaf means is the right one. Hakol makom shenever kaf einay elo yamin. So that's how I know that when the Torah just uses the word kaf, it means the right one. Frank the Gemara about me boyle legufei. Maybe we need it just to tell us the pasuk shot of the pasuk. Smolas. You needed to tell you the etzem halacha that this avodah must be done with the kohen pouring the oil on his left hand. Zok Gemara no, because smolas achrina. There's another pasuk that says smolas, and therefore, since the Torah repeated it, it means dafka. Here it's smolas, but everywhere else it doesn't mean smolas. Frek the Gemara. The ema einmit achamiyut elul rabbis. Zok the Gemara, when it says it twice, maybe that means to tell you adarabba that the right side, the right kaf would be allowed because einmiyut achamiyut elul rabbis. As Rashi says, the ema lahachi also smoy lachrina lemit achamiyut. The mitavayu shaminan yemanis loy ve'einmit achamiyut elul rabbis. The afil yemin the kohen would be kshera by the shemen of Mitzvah. Zok Gemara, we have a third simolis. Simolis achrinaxit. Kan simolis vein acher simolis. To teach us that here it has to be the left and not anywhere else. Kavalted. Zok Gemara weiter. Veima adarabba. Who said that's what you should learn from the third simolis? Maybe say ma kan simolis af ba'al nami simolis. Maybe It's teaching us that stam kaf means smallest, and the Torah was just megala that by the Messiah. So the Gemara, arba smallest ksivi. It actually says 4 times smallest in the Pasha Mitzayra, Trei ba'ani, twice when we're discussing the carbon of the ani, utrei ba'asher, and twice when we're talking about the carbon of the asher. Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera, al boyin yodei hayamanis, al boyin raglei hayamanis techsiv u'amali. Why does it say boyin yodei and boyin raglei hayamanis? And Rashi says, Dorish nami al boyin yodei hayamanis, al boyin raglei hayamanis, bein b'shem mitzayra asher, bein ba'ani. Why did it have to repeat it so many times? Lamali Rashi, given the chsiv al dama asher yitin es hashemen. I would already know Dal Yodeh Smolasi. I would already know that it has to be on his right hand. And let's have a look quickly. Zakt Gemara, Chad lahachshir tzoden, v'chad lahachshir, v'chad live soil, tzidei tzoden. Zakt Rashi, Chad al boyin yad diyad bein the regel lahachshir tzoden, shel boyin. So even if it was not on boyin yodei's stomach, even if it's not mamish on the stomach, it's on the side of the stomach would be good enough. V'chad al boyin bein diyad bein the regel is live soil tzidei tzoden, means basar atachtoin. You can't put it below the thumb on his closer to the palm, because al aminon v'loy tachas. It can't be under the thumb. It has to be right on the thumb. Okay, Mincha will repeat that over tomorrow. We'll stop here. Mincha will be mamshich tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be back here in person. Everyone should have a wonderfully awesome day.